speak, and write in the areas of their lives that have been the biggest struggles. Because unless you've struggled, you haven't learned anything. God hasn't taken you through a journey. And for me, when we got married, sex was terrible. It was the worst part of our marriage. It hurt. My husband wanted it all the time. He felt rejected. I felt rejected. It was just all a big mess. And it took us several years to get out of that, to learn things, to figure out how to really love each other, how to forgive each other, how to find real intimacy. But we got there. And so this kind of became my thing. Like, I was quite passionate about this, but I didn't speak about it that much because sex is weird. You don't really talk about it in public. In 2008, though, I started blogging, and I was in the mommy blog space. Do y'all remember that back then? You know, everyone had a blog where they were talking about parenting and organizing and housework, and I was doing that. But every now and then I would write about sex and my traffic would grow. I'm like, wow, okay, people really like learning about sex. Who knew? So I kept writing about sex, and I kind of became the Christian sex lady. Nobody grows up thinking, you know what I want to do for my career? I want to be the Christian sex lady, but that's what I became. And in 2012, I wrote my first big book, The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex. I've since rewritten it. It came out last week, the new edition. I wrote 31 Days to Great Sex, the Orgasm course, Libido course. I was creating all of this awesome content on my blog at tolovehonorandvacuum.com. But there was one thing I wasn't doing. I wasn't reading other marriage and sex books because I have this really big fear of plagiarizing. And so my husband and I are speaking at marriage conferences, and I'm writing stuff, and I'm talking about, when someone asks me for book recommendations, I often mention some of the bestsellers like Love and Respect and things like that. And because I figured they love Jesus, I love Jesus, we're all saying the same thing. 3 years ago, it was as if a nuclear bomb went off in my living room, because I was on Twitter one afternoon. It was January. It was a Friday afternoon. I had a migraine. I didn't want to work, and I was procrastinating. And there were people on Twitter, and they were fighting about whether or not they needed love or respect. And they were referring to Emerson Eggerich's book, Love and Respect, where he says that women mostly need love and men mostly need respect. And I thought, yeah, I need respect too. And then I thought, I have that book upstairs and I've never read it. This is a great way to continue to procrastinate, but feel like I'm still working. So I went and got that book, and I turned to the sex chapter, which is in the men section. So the sex chapter is in what men need, not what women need. And I read, to my horror, if your husband is typical, he has a need that you don't have. And I'm like, okay. And it said that women are to minister to their husbands sexually as unto Jesus Christ. And that if you should rejoice in this, because it doesn't take very long and it makes him really happy. And if you don't do it, he's going to have an affair, and you need to have sympathy for his struggle with lust. And that was like the whole thing. That was it. There was nothing about how sex is supposed to be intimate. There wasn't a single word about women's sexual pleasure. In fact, he even said that the purpose of sex is men's physical release. That was it. And then he said that women need emotional release. I don't know what that is. I picture like the movie, The Proposal. Do you remember The Proposal? I don't know how many of you have seen it, but there's a scene where Sandra Bullock is in the woods with Betty White, and she's like singing and that's what I picture as emotional release. But anyway, so I'm reading this, and I start FaceTiming with my daughter, Rebecca, who works with me on the blog. She's like 26, so I know I look young. It's not like my daughter's 8 or anything, okay? So I'm not that gross. Anyway, so I'm FaceTiming with my daughter, and I'm FaceTiming with another young woman who works on the blog, and I'm saying, I don't know what to do about this. Like, this is really bad. If this is what people are being taught, no wonder women are still having such a hard time with sex, and couples are having such a hard time with sex. So we did a whole series on the blog the next week on the problems with love and respect. And in the process, we heard from hundreds of women who said that that book enabled abuse in their marriage. And we wrote into Focus on the Family. I had been on Focus on the Family 3 times. I thought they would listen to me, and they ignored us. And that's when Joanna, who works for me, who's a statistician, It's amazing how God works these things out. She had a baby, so she dropped out of her university program. She'd already got a master's and she decided not to do her PhD, but she's a fully trained statistician and epidemiologist. And she said, we could do a study and we could see how the messages in the evangelical world are affecting women's sexual and marital satisfaction. And so that's what we did. And that is the Great Sex Rescue right here. And it's 20,000 women. We surveyed 20,000 women. It was 130 questions minimum. So there were more if you had been divorced or widowed or remarried, anything. So minimum 130 questions, took most people about half an hour of their lives. And we had 20,000 women answer it. We've since surveyed several thousand men as well. And I'll be giving you some of those stats today too. But what I want to do today is I want to explain what led up to the Great Sex Rescue and some of the depressing things we found. I'm going to do the depressing stuff first. And then I want to invite us to reframe how we see sex so that it can be something which binds you together and which becomes this life-giving energy in your marriage, rather than something which is soul-sucking, which it has become for so many people. So with that being said, let me tell you a big picture, some of the big findings that we had. Here's what we set out to do. We asked women first about their marital satisfaction and then about their sexual satisfaction. And we got like up close and personal. Like we did not hang back here. Okay, so we got some really, really nitty gritty stuff. And then we presented them with a number of key teachings in the evangelical world and in the secular world as well, so that we could measure people who believed those things against people who didn't believe them and see if that impacted marital and sexual satisfaction. These were not necessarily Christian beliefs. So when I'm critiquing beliefs, I'm not critiquing the Bible and I'm not critiquing Jesus and I'm not critiquing Christianity. I think what has happened is that we have added things and things have entered into our culture which are not of Jesus, and that's what's messing us up. So that's what we looked at. We found 4 big teachings that really, really wreck things. And I want to share with you just 2 typical ones right now that are quite interesting. The first one comes from, it can be best summed up from the book Every Man's Battle, which says that lust, all men struggle with lust. It's every man's battle. And we hear that everywhere. Women need to cover up so as not to tempt men. Women can be stumbling blocks because men are very visual. We hear this all over the place. By the way, we have since done a survey of women based on their teachings as teenagers for another upcoming book. And as bad as I thought this message was in the Great Sex Rescue, oh boy, does it hurt our teen girls. Like seriously hurt our teen girls. But this idea that all men struggle with lust, it's every man's battle. When women are taught that, even if they never believe it, when they're taught it as teenagers, when they get married, their libido goes down significantly. They have less trust in their husbands. They're more than twice as likely to have sex only because they feel like they have to, not because they want to. And this is only if they're taught it, not even if they believe it. If they believe it, everything gets so much worse. This is one of those beliefs that it was the only belief we measured that affected you, even if you never believed it. And we think it's because if you grow up in a culture which is always teaching this, you get a very distorted sense of what men are. Now I can hear a lot of the wheels turning in your brain, and you might be saying, but Sheila, all men do struggle with lust. So, okay, maybe that's a bad message, but it's still the truth. Well, here's some stuff that isn't in the Great Sex Rescue. It's in a follow-up book that we just did, The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex, right here. This just came out last week. But we surveyed guys because we wanted to test this. Is lust every man's battle? And we asked a series of questions. And first of all, 75% of men did say that, yes, they have a daily struggle with lust. Okay, so 75% is a lot, right? But it's still not every man. So it's not every man. 75% say they struggle with lust. But then we gave them a whole bunch of different scenarios where they could lust. And we asked, what would you do? What are you most likely to do in these scenarios? And our options ranged everywhere from like not noticing her body to noticing, thinking she's pretty, to being tempted to do something, to staring at her, to actually masturbating or something in the car. We actually put masturbating in the car as one of the options. We didn't want to. That made us look really, really sick and disgusting, but that's actually in Every Man's Battle. And so we wanted to measure if this is really actually happening, because Every Man's Battle made it sound normal to masturbate in the car at the gym parking lot. So we wanted to see if guys actually did this. Interestingly, nobody checked that off. So it's the authors of Every Man's Battle think it happens all the time, but guys actually don't. Anyway, so we measured this. And what we found is, of the 75% of guys who say they struggle with lust on a daily basis, half of them do not show any signs of lusting in the scenarios that we gave, and they do not watch porn. So they're saying they struggle with lust, but they're not showing any signs of it. And so we wonder if what's happening is that we have conflated noticing with lusting. And we think that if you notice a woman has a nice figure, you have already sinned. Imagine the shame that we are heaping on 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. Because if they think that if I notice a girl has a nice figure, I have sinned, how can they go through life without sinning? Like, it's hopeless. And I think we've done this to a whole generation of Christian men where they feel like it is hopeless. Jesus never said that noticing a woman is beautiful is lusting. He said, whoever looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery. That's a deliberate action combined with a deliberate mindset. This is really important because sin is voluntary. The kind of sin that Jesus is talking about is a voluntary sin. It is not an involuntary reaction. So noticing someone is beautiful, seeing someone is beautiful is not a sin. Staring at her, getting gratification from her body, sure, absolutely. We shouldn't be doing that. But noticing is not a sin. And I think that we've conflated those two things, and we've made guys think they're lusting when they're not. And it also makes women into the enemy. In Every Man's Battle, for instance, they say, if you go into an office, you need to turn away from the receptionist because receptionists often bend over. And you wouldn't want to see a woman bend over. So you need to get into the habit of when you go into an office, turning away from the receptionist. Jesus never refused to look at women. Jesus chose to truly see women. And what have we taught is the proper thing to do? You know, when you choose to ignore a woman, to look away from a woman, you are still treating her like a sex object. That's still objectification. You may not be lusting, but you're still seeing her as a threat instead of a person. And we can never get over lust if we see women primarily as objects to consume or to use. And yet this is the way that we have tended to talk about lust in the evangelical church. And I think that's why this message has been so destructive to women. The other big thing, here's another teaching that goes right along with it, is that women should have frequent sex with their husbands to keep them from watching porn. Okay, this is very much part of Every Man's Battle as well. They say when he quits cold turkey, so when he quits lust and porn, be like a merciful vial of methadone for him. How many women does that get you going? Like, oh yeah, baby, that is totally sexy. I want to be methadone. Like, that's just a real problem, because that says what he really wants is to lust after all these other women, but he will satiate himself with you so that he doesn't go after all these other women. That's a terrible message. And that message too is very destructive to women. And yet we see it in a lot of our literature. Kevin Lehman in Sheet Music, for instance, told women that your period is a difficult time for your husband. And so how dare you bleed out of your vagina? Anyway, so your period Your period is a difficult time for your husband. And so women have found that if they give hand jobs or oral sex during your period, it's easier for him to not watch porn. And this applies to the postpartum phase too. So when you push a baby out of your hoo-ha and you've got stitches everywhere, apparently what we're to be concerned about is his physical release. Intended for pleasure says the same thing. During the period of abstention in the postpartum period, you need to make sure that he ejaculates as often as he did before you were pregnant. I think you can understand why these messages can cause a woman's libido to really fall. But here's the one that actually was the most harmful. And it's what we called the obligation sex message. We measured this belief: a woman is obligated to give her husband sex when he wants it. 43% of women said they were taught that before they were married. 39% said they entered marriage believing it. When women believe the obligation sex message, their chance of experiencing primary sexual pain increases to almost the same statistical effect as if they had been abused. There's 0.1% separating the confidence intervals of those two things, which means they're basically almost statistically the same. Vaginismus is a sexual dysfunction disorder that women can experience where the muscles of the vaginal wall contract and become very tight, and it makes penetration difficult, if not impossible. We've known for 60 years in the literature that religiously conservative women suffer from this at twice the rate of the general population. Evangelical women suffer from this in huge numbers. If you talk to any pelvic floor physiotherapist whose main job it is to help women work through this, they will tell you that most of their clients are Christians. And one of the reasons we wanted so many women in our survey was to figure out why. I mean, being religious, that doesn't cause vaginismus. There's something specific that we are being taught that does. And we found that this message, this obligation sex message, is one of the things that is the most highly correlated with vaginismus. Now, what do obligation sex and abuse have in common? Both of those things tell women, you don't matter. He has the right to use you however he wants. And women's bodies interpret that message as trauma. And what's interesting is that we can do this even if our husbands don't believe the message. It isn't necessarily our husbands giving us the message. It is the culture that we have grown up in that has told us this over and over again, that you don't matter. He has the right to use you. He has needs. You need to fulfill them. That's a very, very ugly view of sex because it erases her as a person. Okay. I know that's depressing, but now I want to give us a more hopeful view of what sex is supposed to be. I'm going to ask a question, and I don't want to see any hands up, okay? Because I'm not really asking this. But if I were to ask how many of you had sex last night, no eager beavers, put your hands up. No one really wants to know that about you. But if I were to say how many of you had sex last night, you would think that what I'm asking is something about, did he put his penis into her vagina and move around till he climaxed? Like what we picture is intercourse. When we hear the word sex, we think intercourse, right? The problem with that definition is that she could be lying there making a grocery list in her head. She could be in emotional turmoil, or she could be in physical pain, and it would still count as having sex. Because if intercourse is all we mean, her experience doesn't matter. She's just there, and he's the one doing the action. He's the one getting the satisfaction. That is not how the Bible talks about sex. The very first time sex is explicitly mentioned is Genesis 4, verse 1, and it says, Adam knew his wife Eve, and they conceived a son. And it's easy to look at that verse and giggle and think, oh, okay, God is using a euphemism, like he's embarrassed of the word for sex. But the Hebrew there, the root word to know, is the same root word that is used in the Psalms when David says, search me and know me, oh God. You know, and Psalm 139 is full of it. You know my going out and my coming in. You know everything about me. It is a longing to be intimately connected and known on every level. And God is telling us that sex is not just a physical release. It is a deep intimacy, a deep vulnerability, a deep knowing. And that means that both people have to matter. That means that when you come to the bedroom, you're coming there with everything that you are, and you are sharing with one another. It can't be obligation then, because if both people matter, it means that both people's needs matter. So intimate, sex is intimate. We know from Song of Solomon that sex is pleasurable. Okay, that whole book is about pleasure, and she is speaking more words than him, so she's having a good time. So it's intimate, it's pleasurable for both, and we know from 1 Corinthians 7 that it is completely mutual. Those do not deprive verses that are often used to tell women you can't deprive him of intercourse, if you look at them, everything that's given to her is given to him, and vice versa. Those verses are all about mutuality. And so sex in the Bible is not one-sided intercourse. It's something which is mutual, intimate, and pleasurable for both. Unfortunately, that is not necessarily what we're experiencing. And I know this was already read for you in that wonderful paragraph about orgasm before we started, but let me talk a bit about the orgasm gap, okay? We found in our surveys that 95% of men almost always reach orgasm during a sexual encounter, but the equivalent number for women is only 48. So that's a 47-point gap. That's a problem. And then when we asked men and women, does he do enough foreplay? When women frequently reach orgasm, both men and women, around 90% or so, say, yes, he does, which makes sense, right? She's having a good time. He's doing something right. But when she doesn't reach orgasm, 71% of men still say, yes, I do enough foreplay. And so do 52% of women. Enough for what? Like, why are we giving ourselves such good marks? And the only reason I can think of, and in talking to couples in our focus groups, what we've realized is one of the most frequent adjectives that women use to describe themselves is broken. I don't work. My clitoris doesn't work. My vagina doesn't work. Sex just doesn't work for me. And so when she doesn't reach orgasm, the assumption is there's just something wrong with me. I don't want sex. I don't like sex. I guess I'm just not sexual. It's very unlikely that's the case, but there are some dynamics that can make that more likely. So let me tell you a story of Tracy and Doug. Okay. Let's imagine that we're told that what couples really need in order to keep their marriage strong and feel intimate is to go out to dinner once a week. So that's what couples do. And so Tracy and Doug, they head to this restaurant like they're told to do, and they order their food and they start talking. They're having a lovely conversation, and the waitress brings Tracy's appetizer. Okay, it's a French onion soup. She eats it, declares it delicious, but nothing comes for Doug. And then the waitress comes, she takes Tracy's bowl away, and she brings Tracy this steak and baked potato, and there's peppercorn sauce. It's amazing. She slathers on the sour cream. The steak's a wonderful medium rare. She's just gushing. She's eating it, declares it delicious, but nothing comes for Doug. And as they're eating, they're talking about their plans for the summer and what they want to do in 5 years. And they're just having a lovely conversation. They're happy, but Doug's getting kind of hungry. And then the waitress comes, takes away Tracy's plate, and brings her dessert, this chocolate molten lava cake. And Tracy puts the spoon in, and the chocolate drips all over the spoon. It's amazing. She eats it. There's whipped cream. It's to die for. And just as she's getting halfway through, Doug's chicken wing appetizer arrives. And he gobbles up one, and then he gobbles up another. And just as he's reaching for his third, Tracy stands up and says, "Oh, that was an amazing dinner. I love doing this with you." And then she heads for the door. And Doug stands up, follows along, forlornly looking at the 4 chicken wings still on his plate. And let me ask you, how much is Doug gonna like going for dinner week after week, year after year? And yet for so many women, that is the story of our sex lives. And it isn't necessarily because there is something wrong with the husband, okay? This is not, please understand me, I'm not trying to blame men. What I'm saying is that we haven't figured out how sex works for her. And then there's all these dynamics that conspire against us. So that often she feels she's broken. She doesn't know how to speak up. He knows there's something wrong. He doesn't want duty sex, but the communication is broken down. And how do we resolve that so that Tracy, or so that Doug gets more than chicken wings, and so that the wife really enjoys sex? Well, let's talk about the sexual response cycle, because this is something that we often don't understand. And I think this is the root to a lot of our problems. Some of you, probably not, well, I know not all of you, but some of you did wait for the wedding night. Again, I don't need hands, okay? You don't need to put up your hand for this one. But, you know, for some of you, your first time was on the wedding night. For others of you, it was before. Doesn't matter. That's in the past. Let's just go forward here. But that first time is really important. It often sets the stage for the rest of your life. And in the church, we tell people to wait for their wedding night because God wants sex for a committed, intimate relationship. And there's good reasons for that. But if you grow up hearing your entire life, just wait for the wedding night. The wedding night is the most glorious night you will ever have. It is amazing. And no one ever tells you that the wedding night comes at the end of the wedding day, which is the longest day of your life. And you didn't sleep the night before. You've had the most stressful week. You had a huge long day where you talked to all these people you barely even know often. And when you finally get back to that apartment or that hotel or wherever you're going, you're exhausted. But this is your wedding night. So you got to do it, you know? And so there you are. And it's often very awkward and really bewildering because you get naked and you go for it. And she doesn't feel a whole lot. And she thinks, well, is that all there is? Well, maybe it'll get better. And so she still doesn't speak up. And because, you know, it's the wedding night and then it's the honeymoon, and she doesn't want to make him feel bad. But it never seems to get better. And meanwhile, he's having this really good time. And so the thought is he is sexual and she just isn't, because he enjoys intercourse and she just doesn't. And that can happen for a lot of couples. Now, this isn't all couples. Some couples, she's really responsive or she's really in the mood and she really wants sex, but it still may not be working for her. And some couples, you know, he's the one where it doesn't work. So it's not always the same, but I want to talk about the most common dynamic first, and then we'll get to some of those other dynamics. But one of the problems that we do have is that we assume that he knows how to have sex because sex is easy for him. And so the way that he has sex is seen as the default, and she needs to catch up. But if we look at the sexual response cycle, it can tell us something about how God made women. In order to reach orgasm, all of us have to go through several physiological stages. Okay, our bodies have to go from not in the mood, not thinking about sex at all, to at the height of pleasure. And there's several stages that you pass through on the way there. One of them is excitement. And this is when, you know, your body is starting to get warmed up. Your heart rate starts to go a little faster. You start to get tingly. This is when you're probably kissing, nuzzling her neck, rubbing hands along each other's arms, cuddling. That's the kind of thing you do in the excitement phase. Then there's arousal, which is when the genital areas seriously wake up. She gets lubricated, her areolas increase in size. You really want genital stimulation in some way. And then you reach plateau where you're almost at orgasm, and then orgasm, etc. Now, the thing is, if you go for her clitoris before she's aroused or before she's even excited, it feels like a pap smear. Okay. It's not a nice experience. Okay. Like, we can read all of these sex manuals that talk about what women like and how, women like this sort of stimulation in their genital region, or women really like it when you do this to their breasts. If you touch those things before she's the least bit excited, it just feels really odd and off-putting. And so we can read these books as women that say, this is what women like, and he's doing exactly that thing. And so we figure, I guess my clitoris is broken. Or I guess I just don't work. But the thing is, you don't want to go for the genitals until you're at the arousal stage. Now, for guys, excitement, arousal, plateau, they all look the same. You get the erection right away, and it doesn't change that much. The erection can get a little bit longer, a little bit thicker, your heart rate can increase, but it's kind of just more of the same. It's not like a whole different thing. But for women, they're very distinct. And so if we don't understand this, and we rush too much to the serious genital stuff before she's even warmed up, it's really easy to think that she's not sexual. Even what brings her to orgasm, those 48% of women who frequently reach orgasm, only 40% do so through intercourse alone. Okay. Most women find other routes to orgasm far more reliable. So it does, just because she needs something different doesn't mean that she is less than or that she's broken. Because here's a little bit of an anatomy tip. God did not put the clitoris up the vagina. He put it on the outside. And that means that we do not get maximum stimulation from intercourse in the same way guys do. Like, I'm going to be a little bit graphic and a little bit off-putting here. Okay, so excuse me for this, but I want you to picture in your head the hand movements that a guy would use when he masturbates versus the hand movements that a woman would use when she masturbates. Which ones most resemble intercourse? Right? It's not what she does. And so think about that when we're thinking about how she's meant to reach orgasm. And this is the way God created her body. God put the clitoris there so that for just a little bit of time, she is supposed to be the center of attention. That's the way her body works. God put her clitoris on the outside so that we could say, okay, women, you don't have to serve anybody right now. You get to be served. This is a time when you get to be the center of attention. And that's the way it is supposed to be. Women take a lot longer to reach orgasm in general than men do. And so, you know what? This is a time when women need to not be so much in control, and when guys need to learn to serve. So, and that's biological. That's just anatomy. That's not theology. That's just anatomy. That's how it works. And a lot of us don't understand that. Now, there's another element of the sexual response cycle, one which is called desire, often called libido. Those two words kind of used interchangeably. They're not entirely interchangeable, but we don't need to go into why. Anyway, let's just think of them as the same thing for now. For some people, desire precedes excitement. So before you even start doing anything, you're totally in the mood. Okay, so desire is when you're like, come take me, baby, or I want that. Okay, that's what desire is. And for some people, it precedes excitement. And for some people, it comes after excitement. So after you've started kissing, after you started touching, after you've started thinking sexual things, that's when your brain kicks in and says, yeah, I really want this. Researchers often call that spontaneous versus responsive libido. So some people just spontaneously want sex, and some people more respond, and then they want sex. The problem is when you watch the media, okay, Netflix, movies, whatever it is, the plot when it comes to sex is always the same. The couple is together and they're panting. And then they kiss and the clothes come off and they end up in bed. And that is the order, right? You pant, you kiss, the clothes come off, you end up in bed. So pant, kiss, clothes, bed, that's what sex is. So there you are at home and you're waiting to pant. And nothing's really happening. And so you figure that you're not in the mood. And again, this is part of the problem with assuming that the higher drive person is the default and that other people are broken. When we asked women, we looked at both spontaneous and responsive desire in women. When women were aroused, excited before they started, we compared those women to women who were not aroused and excited before they started, but were confident they were going to get there, so more responsive. And then we looked at their feelings after sex. And we found that it doesn't matter. As long as you reach orgasm and you feel close during sex, you have the same blissful feelings afterwards. You have the same physical satisfaction afterwards. You have the same love for your spouse afterwards. It doesn't matter whether you're spontaneous or responsive. It doesn't mean that one is less sexual. Okay, you're both sexual, and men can have a responsive libido too. It isn't that it's always men with a spontaneous and women with a responsive. Women can have a spontaneous libido and men can have a responsive libido. And if you're a woman with more of a spontaneous libido, married to a guy with more of a responsive libido, you can feel like a freak because you've been told your whole life that men need sex and you don't. And then here you are and you're like raring to go and he doesn't want it. And so what's wrong with you? Because all guys want sex, right? And I've talked to so many couples where there's nothing wrong. It's just a libido difference. But they end up in therapy because they've grown up thinking that it's supposed to be one way or the other. It's just not that way with them. Another misconception is that if a woman has a higher drive, she's necessarily going to be more orgasmic. I mean, they often find it easier to reach orgasm, but it's not guaranteed. You still have to go through all the sexual response cycle. And so she still is going to need foreplay, even if she has a higher drive. So we need to understand this about ourselves. Okay, so that's how our bodies work. Now, knowing all of that, can we think differently about what the big issues are in the bedroom? Because when you ask people, what is the thing that we always fight about? What is the main source of tension when it comes to sex in our lives? The vast majority of people will say something about frequency, right? How often are we supposed to have sex? But what we found in our survey is that when women frequently reach orgasm, when they feel emotionally connected during sex, when there's high marital satisfaction, when there's no porn use, and when there's no sexual dysfunction, frequency tends to take care of itself. So in other words, frequency is not the problem. It is the symptom of the problem.
Excuse me, can you repeat that again one more time? The 5 things.
Sure. Okay, when women frequently reach orgasm, when they feel emotionally connected during sex, when there's high marital satisfaction, when there's no porn use in the marriage, and when there's no sexual dysfunction, frequency almost always takes care of itself.
Thank you.
So when there's a problem with frequency, we need to start asking what is going on with these 5 things. And it may not be that there's something wrong with your spouse. Please, I really want to stress this because what we found repeatedly is that one of the reasons that women don't feel emotionally connected during sex may not be because of their husbands. It might be because of the stuff that they believed growing up about sex. It might be because they're sexual assault survivors, and that can be true for husbands as well, right? What is it? 1 in 5 girls, 1 in 5 men, and 1 in 9 men before the age of 16 are sexual assault survivors. So this is, this is serious stuff. So that doesn't mean there's necessarily something wrong with the marriage. It could just be that there's things that we need to work out about sex. I was talking to one woman in a focus group who she had got married believing that if she didn't give her husband sex frequently, he would have an affair, because this is what many of our resources teach. And so she gave him sex all the time, never liked sex, never enjoyed sex. It was actually quite painful. And she was going to a pelvic floor physiotherapist to work on the pain issues, but she was still having sex because she didn't want him to go have an affair. And he sat down with her one day and he said, I just get the feeling that this is such an area of disconnect with us, and I don't know what's going on. And she explained to him that she was afraid he was going to have an affair. And he's like, what are you talking about? I would never do that, ever. I don't ever want you to do anything that you don't want to do. I really want sex to be the place where we are experiencing real intimacy, not where you feel like you just have to do something for me. And over the next few months, he proved that to her. So sometimes they would be in the middle of something and she'd be like, this isn't working for me. And they would actually stop and roll over, and he would go to sleep. And there was no pressure put on her. And he proved, hey, this is about us. It's not just about me. And for the first time in her marriage, she became orgasmic. The pieces finally started to come together. The pelvic floor physiotherapy started to work more, but she just had a lot of stuff she had to get rid of that she had internalized that didn't even come from him. But then there's marriages where it is coming from him because there's been longstanding porn problems, for instance. And she can also be the one using porn. It tends to be the man. The man, I think it's 4 times more likely, but it can be the other way as well. But when there's a longstanding porn problem, that can distort how we see sex, because porn and sex are not substitutes for one another. Porn is saying, I want to use you for my gratification. And true sex is saying, I want to know you. Those can't be substitutes. And if someone has a very pornified style of relating, then they're going to run away from true intimate sex. And that's often why guys who use porn lose their libidos for their wives. It's also why more sex can't cure porn use, because they're different things. And so that may be something that needs to be looked at. And the other issue is with porn often comes an inability to be emotionally vulnerable. Because what often happens, especially when porn use starts in the teen years, which is very common for people under the age of 40 who have used porn, it's something that started when you were 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. And I do need to say, showing porn to a minor is a form of sexual assault. In many jurisdictions, it can actually be, you can be arrested for it. So we need to start remembering that when young children, young teens see porn, that's very traumatic. And that can have long-standing effects long-term. And I think if we were to picture these 11, 12, 13-year-old kids, we'd have more of an understanding of the harm that's being done. It's sometimes hard to see when they're an adult. But you think about growing up with porn, and porn helps you to feel better. It sort of soothes negative feelings. And so you're bored, you go watch porn. You had a bad day at school, you feel insecure, you feel weird about yourself, you go watch porn because it gives you a high, a buzz. And so what happens growing up is you start to numb your feelings with the porn. And now you don't know how to handle negative emotions, and it can cut you off emotionally. And that can really stunt a marriage, because you need emotional vulnerability if you're going to feel really intimate. And many people have used porn or video games or shopping or other things to numb those feelings, so that instead of becoming open and vulnerable, they turn to something else, which is safer. It's like porn allows you to feel connected without having to be connected. It allows you to feel strong without having to be strong. And that's what's been going on in so many people's lives. So if we're going to have healthy sex, we need to understand that it isn't just something one person needs. It is something which should be mutual, intimate, and pleasurable for both. Sex is the culmination of intimacy in your marriage. It cannot create it on its own. It can feed it and it can build on it, but it is not the foundation. The foundation is that true emotional vulnerability. I want to give you one quick tip before I finish off. But if emotional vulnerability is difficult for you, if this has been one of the reasons why sex hasn't been working because you don't feel close, then here's a quick exercise that you can do to help overcome that. Okay. Every day, at the end of the day, I want you to share 2 emotional moments with your spouse. The time that you felt the most in the groove, the most like God was working through me, I was totally on fire, and the time where you felt the most discouraged and defeated. Now, some people call this the high-low exercise, like the best thing that happened to you and the worst thing that happened to you. I don't want you to think of it that way, because the worst thing might be someone rear-ended you, or the best thing might be you won the lottery. But those aren't like emotional moments. I want to get to the things that get to the emotional heart of who you are. So the time you felt the most in the groove, like what I am doing is having the most impact, I'm totally being awesome. And the time you felt the most defeated and discouraged. And if you share those 2 moments with each other every day, you will grow your emotional connection. You will practice how to use emotional language. You'll even start recognizing things in yourself. And it doesn't take very long, because what do we normally say? We say, how was your day? Or what did you do today? Well, I had a bunch of client meetings. I went to the bank at lunch. Like, that doesn't tell you anything. I want to know when you were the most defeated and when you were the most in the groove. And now you know each other on an emotional level, and sex becomes about that culmination. All right. I told you about one dinner story. I want to end with another dinner story. Okay. So a couple of years ago, when my kids were much younger, we sent them away to summer camp for a week. And my husband booked us into a place called the Couples Resort, close to where we live. And the logo for this place is a couple that's intertwined. Okay, so they're like this. Every room has a king-size bed and a jacuzzi. So he tells me that he's booked us in there. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I know what you want. But like, that's fine. That's all good. I'm good with that. We mentioned to a few friends in our town that we were heading there, and they all said the same thing. They all said, oh, you're going to love the food. Great. Like, I wasn't thinking about that, but thank you for the heads up. So we get to the couples resort, and the first day, like, I went kayaking. We played tennis. By the time we got to dinner, I was so excited about this food that I had heard so much about. We'd worked up quite an appetite, and they brought us a menu, and it had 7 courses to choose from. And the first course, one of the options was scallop. Like, I thought they had left out the final S on the word, but it said scallop, and I ordered the scallop. And it was delicious, but it was just one. And then the second course, I had this wild rice and beef consomme soup. Best soup I've had in my life, but the bowl was about that big. And there's like 15 minutes between each course. And by the time the third course arrives, I'm thinking in my head about this truck stop close to where I live, where we take my in-laws for lunch sometimes. And you can get this cheeseburger platter with this mountain of fries and a huge Caesar salad. And you munge it all down. It's like, can feed a small country. It's amazing. And I thought, I could really go for a cheeseburger platter right about now. But by the time that meal was over, I was actually quite full. And it occurred to me that what that restaurant was doing was it was trying to whet your appetite for what was coming next. It was trying to make an experience out of eating so that you could just enjoy it and savor it. And I thought, how often do we treat sex more like the truck stop treats food? I'm hungry, and that's a problem. So I'm going to eat as much as I can, as fast as I can, so that I can see how long I can go until I'm hungry again. And what would happen if we treated sex more like that 5-star restaurant treated food, where everything in your relationship is just whetting your appetite for each other on every level? And you start to savor each other, and you like the experience of just being with each other, and you flirt more. You know, you text each other during the day, like, looking forward to seeing all of you tonight, or, you know, or when you come in, you kiss your spouse before you kiss the dog. And, you know, but, you know, and you hold hands more, and you talk more, and yes, you make love, but all of it is growing your relationship. It's not just something that you tack on, it's the whole thing. And if we could see making love not just as this one part at the end of the day, but instead this dance that you do together throughout your life, where you're just loving each other and serving each other and building each other up and listening to each other. And yes, you're pleasuring each other. And yes, you're reveling in each other, but it's the whole package. And I think that is what God intended, where it's mutual and it's intimate and it's pleasurable and it's focused on each other, and it grows us and it becomes something which is life-giving. That's what God meant. It's not an obligation thing which becomes crushing. It's instead this beautiful opportunity and experience to connect. And that's what it's meant for. And I hope that all of you, no matter where you're at, can grow in that knowledge and in that experience, so that we can learn what real intimacy is, rather than this false counterfeit that we've often had. So that is what I wanted to share with you. I know that I've seen everyone tweeting and putting it on Instagram for some questions. So I'm hoping there might be some that come in, and I'm happy to answer questions, or whatever else you want to do now.
Wow, 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 wow. Please.
Men, grab a mic. Men, don't leave the room.
Yeah.
Men, stay in the room.
Why are you leaving,
I
man?
have no mic. I have no mic.
Is it on?
Sheila, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wow. Wow. You know, I don't even know where to go with this. I mean, I was standing there and everybody's like listening to you, and it's like, what do we do with all this? Men.
Order a scallop.
I try ordering scallop all the time. No. This is a whole nother conversation. My wife's listening. Giovanna, say hi to Sheila. Are you there, Jolie? Say hi to Sheila.
Yes, she's listening because she was sending us comments.
Yeah. So, Sheila, you know, I really, everyone needs to hear this. This is a real crisis. Yeah. I know, because I had the same crisis with my wife, and my wife was texting me just now while you were talking. We still have this crisis, by the way. I thought we had it, but my wife and me, that is. But she says we still got it. So. I try to make scallops all the time. Who said that? So we have she was whetting your appetites. She's coming with her husband, and she's coming with Tammy in January 21. She's going to be here all day.
Yes. That's my dog, Joey.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you,
Thank
Joey.
you. I'm getting so distracted. I'm so distracted by this whole thing. Not your dog, just the whole thing. This is so much information. It was so good. You know, I think men are not gonna like this, and maybe women too, but the men really need to, what happened?
What day is it again? I thought it was June.
No,
Yeah,
January.
It was June.
It was
No,
June.
Oh, it was June. Okay, you got it.
But-
Oh, January.
Canada has different restrictions.
Okay.
She's in Canada. So,
Hence the sweater, you know.
that's right.
I knit this, by the way, just for everyone. I just. Look at, you see the table?
Sheila. She stands in line in the supermarket and she pulls out her knitting thing and she
My
starts.
socks. Yeah, my
Yeah.
socks.
That's so fun.
So who wants socks?
So
You
who
can
wants
start-
to place their order now? For January. No, I really, you know, as a man listening to this, I don't even know what to do with this because I'm guilty, right? I've done it, right? So I won't answer for the women. That's their problem because she speaks about the men and the women, right? So I've done it. Everything she says, I've done, and she hasn't even told us the rest yet. And I'm gonna probably be in line first to have done everything she said to women. So I want to repent, and I really want to apologize to all the women in the room, from the men, and all the women on Zoom. I mean, if I can just stand in and apologize for one man to all the women in the room, you know? And I gotta apologize to my wife, my daughter. Thank God I only have one daughter and one wife, otherwise the apology list would be pretty long, you know? And what I've done to other women too, yeah? Well, I think maybe I still do it, but not physically anymore because I don't cheat. Okay. Everyone, please. Oh! Oh, she and her husband.
Woo! Hello! Guys, Sheila's here with her husband. I'm trying to look over there. We can't hear her though, Emmanuel. Okay. Sheila,
Hi, can you hear me now?
now we can hear you.
Okay, we're not sure this is gonna work because there might be too much feedback from you guys, so he might need to go away. But if he can come here for the questions, that's great. Otherwise, I'll put my earphones back on. So we'll see.
There shouldn't be any
Perfect.
feedback. It should all be good.
So are you guys cool with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome.
Yeah.
That's male and female. So guys, remember, some of you were not here when we were welcoming everybody, and we're gonna invite you to ask your questions. Remember guys, what I said, it's a question. It's not, let me tell you what my research has shown. No, you don't wanna know about your research? I'm sure it's been valuable, right?
Tell them to.
But this is, she's the expert, they're the experts. Who wants to hear from us,
This one,
right? So remember, it's a question, and don't make it like, okay, I have a 3-part question, and no, okay? That's not for today.
The dialogue is for January.
Yeah, or Thursday, you can come and share your
Well,
experience.
we're gonna fly them down for Thursday? No problem.
So, while people get settled in, I have somebody who sent me a question, and I thought maybe this would be a good way to start. Okay. This person wants to remain anonymous, but guys, if we could please come in and get seated. I know this is not our usual schedule. We'll have a birthday break and empanada break later.
And I'll ask you all for your money later.
And we'll do the offering later. So something's going on with this thing. Okay, this is the
Yeah,
first
don't
question.
wait. Let's go.
And I have, if someone can help me, is Giorgio around? This thing is.
What do you need? Oh, okay.
We're talking about sex and look what's happening. Stay there, little scallop, stay there.
You just need a little touch.
Thank you. It just needed a little touch.
You guys are awesome. We're gonna love being there in January.
Okay. Just while
We're not churchy. That's the problem here.
all of a sudden everything's a little phallic. Sorry. Okay. What are suggestions to increase libido after menopause? And can there also be a sexy way to schedule sex?
Yeah.
Thank you for the person who texted me this question.
Yeah, good question. Okay, so here's what happens in menopause that often people don't understand is you actually have like less blood flow to the genitals. And so the vagina can actually become a lot less elastic, and it can become thinner. And
the
the epithelium can become thinner. And so things can just start to sting a little bit or just feel less comfortable. It's harder to get lubricated. And it can also become harder to get aroused because if there's not as much blood flow there, then even when you're getting stimulation there, it just takes longer. The other issue is that I don't know if people realize this, but over a typical menstrual cycle, you go through different hormonal things. So right after your period, so most women ovulate kind of between like days 11 and 16, somewhere in there. And if you count your first day of your period as day 1, so let's say your period lasts for 5 days. So then on like sort of day 6 to day 12, like your libido is actually going up until it gets to the height at ovulation, because your body is saying, let's get pregnant. Like your body wants to get pregnant. And so your libido goes up when you're fertile, because you're not fertile all the time. You're only fertile right around ovulation. So your body goes, let's go for it. So there's this big jump in libido. And then after ovulation, your libido, the hormone levels change and your libido goes down. And then right before your period, your libido starts going up again, but you're also grumpy. So it's like, I'm mad at you, but I want you, like for that.
You've been there, guys.
Yeah. Now, what happens around menopause is that big spike goes away because you're not ovulating anymore. And so you often find your libido changes and then your ability to get aroused changes. What I want people to realize, though, is that it doesn't mean you can't enjoy sex or that you can't reach orgasm. It's just that it's different now. And it means you've got to spend more time, like have a bath together. Just take things slower. That now may not be the time for quickies, or now may be the time you've got to invest in lubricants. And that's okay. It doesn't mean, because we heard from, I remember one guy wrote to me saying he was really upset because his wife would say she was really excited and she would be acting really excited, but she was still really dry. And so he thought she was faking. But actually what happens often during menopause is like the desire part, the libido part in your head is all firing and you actually do feel aroused, but your body just isn't doing it in the same way. And so that's where some lubricant can help. So all that to say, that's what often happens at menopause. It doesn't mean that it's hopeless or that you'll never orgasm again. It just means you kind of have to learn your body and take things slower because it is different.
There are a lot of changes that happen in menopause too, like the hot flashes and other things that are hard to deal with, and they can make sex challenging. And so basically, if you're having a lot of difficulty with menopause from a hormonal standpoint too, talking to your gynecologist can be really helpful in that regard. The other thing is Sheila's talking about using lubricant to help with sex because of the lack of lubrication. There's actually some products too that are actually designed to be sort of like restorative to the vaginal wall too. So like more than just providing lubrication, they provide sort of a bit of a coating and helping the skin to sort of heal and be more durable, like in the form of vaginal melts and things like that as well too. That can also help.
Yeah. And then is there a sexy way to schedule sex? I think it's all in your head, right? Like if you decide Tuesday, we're going to rock each other's worlds. And so we're going to have scallops for dinner. Like we were talking earlier.
I don't know what that's about.
We're going to play the jazz music all night. We're going to do some bomb dance. Like you just plan, you make it into an event. So it's not just sex, like the whole evening becomes an event. You know, you do some dancing in the living room. I think that's how you do it, where it's not like tonight's the night I have to, it's tonight's the night that it's all about us.
Yeah.
And you make it all about you in different ways.
So youth group night is a good night for that.
If your kids are youth group.
Take your teens off. Tell them, go have a fun time at youth group. Maybe go out to Dairy Queen afterwards with your friends for a long time. That sort of thing.
So those are some of the also some practical advices. Dairy Queen, youth group. So that's very well.
As long as youth group is not in your house.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's right.
I need some lines, so every Friday and Saturday I'm saying to my daughter, so where are you going tonight with me? She says nowhere.
Well, we always told our kids that youth group is really, really important for your spiritual development. You have to go every week. And when I was a kid, I actually went to a youth group at another church just to get an understanding of what other denominations felt, you know. And that would be really good for you to consider as well. Maybe 2 youth groups you could go to.
Yeah.
I love all these practical ideas. Okay, so
Tuan,
you have
said
more
had a
questions?
question?
Okay, who?
You want to come and ask your question here?
Come here, Tuan.
I think they had answered a little bit.
No, Tuan, come here.
Remember, question, not a comment, and then you will have a
It's
question.
okay, it's all right. Yeah,
Remember,
all right.
it's a
Yeah, don't
question,
worry. We're
not a
gonna take as
commentary,
many as we
everybody.
can. Yeah?
Thank you. Come
And
on.
don't talk about the fathers of the church. We don't want to hear about them.
Thank you, Sheila. And I didn't get your husband's name.
Oh,
Oh,
Keith.
sorry, I'm
This
Keith.
is
I'm
Keith.
Keith, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming on too. My question was because you brought it up about the libido, and that's like, I've never heard about that. And I'm wondering what the heck is libido? It can be so many questions, but yeah, you said there's desire, but I want like, wait, but what causes, like what increases it, what decreases it? Or when do you discover libido? And then you also mentioned there's a differences in people's libidos. Like, how do you understand your partner's libido? How do you understand your libido? How do you discover libido and then like use that in your everyday language to understand like this is where they're at, this is where you're at, and then you approach that.
Yeah.
Good.
So,
Sure. Do you want to do medically or me to go
Well, I don't
first?
know what you cover.
I would like a
right?
medical.
Okay, yeah.
So- So I think there's kind of 2 different issues. You go ahead, you start,
Okay,
and then I'll
okay.
add in what I want.
Yeah, technically, what the medical idea is that libido is the desire for sex. So when when your mind and body both desire sex, gosh, we get into all kinds of stuff here. It tends to refer to the cognitive idea that you want to have sex. So like your mind wants to have sex, you're ready for sex, you think about sex, you have a strong, we call it sex drive. Like there's different ways that we call it. And it can be, I don't even know if I want to get into all that. I'm trying to think of how, because there's so much I could say.
Did you cover spontaneous and?
Yeah, I did
okay,
spontaneous
good.
and responsive. If you, the people who have no libido, the way they measure no libido is usually someone who never has any sexual dreams, who, because most of us do have sexual dreams. And if you have like a totally hot sexual dream about someone else, it doesn't mean you cheated on your spouse. Like that's got nothing to do with anything. like people, your sexual dreams aren't really, or like if you have a sexual dream where you do something that you would never want to do, that doesn't mean that you're perverted. Like our dreams just do different things. Cause I know a lot of people have issues with thinking their dreams mean that they cheated, and that's not it. But most people do have sexual dreams to some extent. Guys, of course, can have ejaculation during a dream, nocturnal emissions, that's the word. But women can too. Women can orgasm during their dreams. So that can be quite common. So if you never have sexual dreams, and if you're not able to get turned on when you want to, that usually is a sign that you have very low libido, and they can do tests on that to see hormone levels. But it tends to be our hormone levels that contribute to our sex drive, but it isn't only that. Because we found so many things that can either raise or lower libido, mostly based on how you think or what you think or the messages that you've grown up with or your experiences. So it's not completely physical.
Yeah,
It really is a whole cocktail of things that all mix together.
So, I would just add that, because I don't know what you covered before about libido, but we could do a whole 1 or 2 hour talk on libido and what it means and navigating differences and all that kind of stuff. But the thing I would say, as Sheila mentioned, if your libido is what you feel to be atypically low, then I think you should look into whether there's hormonal causes or medical causes for that. But I think the other thing too is that we tend in the church, especially, to think that our libido is atypically high, especially among men, because often I find that we as men are looking for sex to do something it's not meant to do. So we are going to the sexual act to feel masculine, as opposed to being confident in our masculinity and thinking what we can bring to this experience so that the two of us can share this. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of guys sort of turn to sex as a way of feeling more like a man. And then therefore they want sex all the time because they're kind of looking for reassurance, as opposed to coming to sex as something that we are doing together for each other, to build each other up and to build this union that God has put us into.
And there's lots of things that can artificially lower libido. Exhaustion is a big thing for women, especially, and men. Stress is a huge thing for guys, can artificially lower libido. So, you know, your hormonal levels may all be saying your libido should be here, but then you get tired and your libido goes down here, or you have 3 kids under the age of 3 and your libido goes through the floor or whatever it might be. So my rule of thumb is if one of you is significantly more exhausted than the other, then the other person needs to pick up some slack, rather than asking for more sex. Yeah.
Good one.
That's good. Thank you.
Repeat that one.
Yeah. Thank you. Does anyone have a question here in this room?
Everybody.
Come on up.
Carlos, come here.
Yeah, I want to mix it up.
Yeah, men, women.
Boy, girl, boy, girl.
Hi. My question has to do for my 12-year-old, she's soon to be 12-year-old daughter. She's in 5th grade and she will be graduating this year, going into middle school. And she is now at the age where this topic will begin to be introduced. And as her mother, I would like to have some wisdom and advice in how to present this to her in a way that's free from all the lies and everything that obviously has been some that has been discussed here. So that is my question.
Okay. Well,
so can I say one quick thing, and then you'll take it over because you do this really, really well. The one thing I would say that
by the way, he's a pediatrician.
I was going to say, I'm a pediatrician. So the one thing I always say to parents too is you put a lot of strain and stress on yourself if you think that I have to give the talk. And what if I give the talk badly? And I think that's not the right attitude. I think that this shouldn't be a talk. This should be a series of discussions that you have. It doesn't have to all happen at one time. And I think a lot of kids will be really overwhelmed if it's all happens at once too. Sometimes that works. Sometimes they just want to get it over with, and then and then you don't talk for a while about it. But I think just trying to keep an open dialogue so that as things come up, they can ask you. And I think the big thing is for you to make sure that you're prepared to answer any questions that you hear from them. And to be able to say when they bring something up that you're like, well, you know what, sweetheart, I don't actually know how to tackle that right now. Give me a day or two to think about that, and we'll talk about that discussion or whatever, that sort of thing. But just the whole point is just, it should be a series of things that you talk about over time, rather than one big lay it all on you now, and then we never have to talk about it again sort of idea.
Okay, so some encouragement. I did this really badly. Like I didn't do the puberty sex thing super well. I mean, I didn't totally fail, but I didn't do it super well. But my girls and I have always had a very open relationship with this. And as they grew up and got more into the teen years, we could talk really well about this, but they always joked about how badly I did puberty. So when they hit 20 and 22, I said, well, then why don't you guys do it better? And they said, okay, we will. And I actually have a puberty course online that you can buy, that you can share with your daughter, or we've added a boys version as well that dads can share with their sons on how to talk about sex and body changes and all that. It's called The Whole Story, and it's quite inexpensive right now because I put it on sale for COVID, and I just have never gotten around to raising the price again. So it's, but yeah, it's a video-based series you can share with your kids. But the one big mistake that I think parents make is we think that once we tell girls about their periods or boys about like nocturnal emissions and all the stuff they go through, that we now need to give them the big sex talk about how they shouldn't have sex till they're married and you shouldn't do all these things. And I'm scared you're gonna do all these things. Just because a girl gets her period does not mean that we should start ascribing sexual feelings to her or motives to her. And I worry that we do that. I think it's really good to separate those two discussions. So, when a girl is 10, telling her about her period, and then as she gets older, then you start to talk about how to navigate sexual feelings, relationships, dating, etc. But what I've found is that a lot of curriculum for kids says, here's what your period is, here's what sex is, here's why you shouldn't have sex, here's why it's really bad if you ever have sex, so now you got to pledge never to have sex. And at that point they're like, I never want to look at a boy ever again. like you'll get them to pledge to anything. So I just think it's really important not to ascribe sexual motives to kids just at that age. And so keep the conversations really about what their bodies are going through and what they might be thinking and confusion and stuff, but not necessarily assume that now they're going to be.
So really separate the medical from the moral aspects of things, because then your kids are going to feel comfortable coming and talking to you about it. If they feel like I can't even ask a medical question because it's all mashed up into this one thing, and my parents are going to think badly of me if I had a fantasy dream or something, if I talked to my dad about that I had a wet dream, and he's going to think I'm some pervert. Then they're not going to talk to you. So just letting them know that, you're going to go through stuff you don't understand. That's okay. I went through it too. I was confused like you're going to be. We'll work through it together. I love you no matter what. And just really being open.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really important to tell both boys and girls when they're like 11 to 12 years old is this is a concept that probably a lot of you haven't heard of: arousal non-concordance. I don't know how many of you have heard that term, arousal non-concordance, but here's what it means. It's when your body gets aroused, but your mind doesn't want to. So your body gets aroused by something that actually your mind is like, oh, that's awful. And that's what often happens with pornography. So kids will see porn and they'll get this biological, physiological reaction to it at the same time as they're really like, ew, that's awful. And so then they think they're perverts. But they also got this real high from it. And so they might seek it out again. And so telling them, just because you have a biological reaction does not mean that you liked it. That's a really important distinction. And that can free a lot of boys, especially to know, like, just because you had a biological thing does not mean you liked it.
Thank you. It's amazing that you mentioned this because I held my former wife hostage for her physiological reaction to my showing her of pornography. I condemned her for many years. Anyways, here's a person who is not here, but she did text in the question. And she says, based on my experience, I have found that increasing my desire for sex is a function of how kind, loving, and serving, in parentheses, emotional, my husband is. It's almost as if his kindness naturally draws me to him. Would you clarify if this is what you mean by responsive libido? Does a woman's libido increase in response to a husband's actions?
Well, I would just say that, I think that sex is not something that's just a physical thing. We as Christians believe that sex is meant to be something that's emotional and even spiritual. Did you talk about the whole Adam knew his wife sort of thing? Yeah. So sex is something that's supposed to be emotional, spiritual, and physical. And I think often in the church, we sort of divide those. And it's like we almost believe that men want the physical part of sex and women want the emotional part of sex. And that's the way that God made us, and we don't want the other part. But that's actually not true. I mean, men and women both respond and enjoy sex more when it's physical and emotional. So if even for a man, if your wife gives you sex, but she treats you badly and cuts you down in front of other people, that's not going to be as fulfilling a relationship as if she's supporting you and encouraging you and talking about how great you are in front of other people. So both of us, male and female, want a partner who's going to emotionally be safe, because the key to great sex is vulnerability. I mean, being able to be open and honest with the person on every level. physically you're naked together, but even emotionally you're naked together. Like when you can really just be who you are with that person, the whole relationship is better in every possible way. So I think both men and women do respond to kindness and love and care in the relationship. And I think that's a great thing. And I think it's a real challenge. I think we should be challenging ourselves as Christians to be trying to do that for each other constantly, submitting to one another in love, right? Trying to show Christ to each other by being selfless and caring.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of responsive libido too. Specifically, again, there's different aspects to the sexual response cycle. And I was more talking about the fact that a lot of women don't actually get to the point where they want to have sex until they've already been kissing for a while. But there can even be a before that stage where you don't even really want to be doing the kissing until you actually feel like you're connected. And so that's definitely an important part. Yeah.
Well,
I'm sure Sheila and Keith didn't expect this neither.
Well, it's actually kind of funny because one of the things that we were on a podcast earlier this month, and they asked me what my favorite verse was. And the verse I said was probably the one that drew me to becoming a Christian, was shared with me, which was the Revelation 3:20, where Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and whoever opens the door, I'll come in and dine with him and he with me." And the thing that strikes me about that verse is we forget it was written to people in a church. We think of it as an evangelical verse, like evangelizing verse, but it was written to people who were believers. And to me, the point of that verse is Jesus doesn't just want to be in your life. He wants to be in every room in your house. And we often shut God off from these areas where we've hurt other people, or where we've been hurt by other people, or where we're scared, or we feel fragile, or we feel insecure, or we feel like God might not accept us if he saw this part of me. And I think that the wonderful thing about our faith is that God doesn't say, get your act together and then come to me. God says, let me come to you where you are. Let me into every room. Let me into all of you, because I love you and I will redeem you. You're my child. I have called you by name. And I find that amazing. And so just all of you watching and listening, I think the lesson I take from this whole situation that just happened is God is saying, let me in. Don't be afraid. Let me in so that I can heal and minister to you. That's what I'm taking away.
I just want to say that if there was anybody else in here who probably had a similar first sexual encounter, or who has been in a sexual relationship with someone who has been in a sexual encounter with prostitutes or strippers or male prostitutes, whatever, and you feel that this message is for you, it is. The healing is also for you. Don't get stuck that it has to be the way Carlos experienced it. I have two questions. One is from a male and one is from a man and one is from a woman. So I'm going to combine them. The man said, how can I deal with my libido and my sexual desires while I'm going through a long process of divorce and separation, while I'm not sexually active but I still have bodily desires? And the woman was asking, how do I deal with my libido and my sexual desires when my spouse doesn't want to have sex? Thank you.
Can I do the woman and you can do the guy?
Sure.
Or you probably want
I'm happy. Whatever. I'm happy. Whatever.
Okay.
It's good.
Yeah. Let me take. How do you deal with your sexual desires if your spouse doesn't want to have sex? It's really important, first of all, to understand, is this a preference or a problem? because it could be that you just simply want sex more than your spouse, but they still want sex. So let's say they're more of a once a week person and you're more of an everyday person. That's not a problem. That's just a preference. And you need to learn how to give to each other, grow your relationship in every other way. And just learn to be patient and love each other. And both of you need to learn that. However, if we veer into problem territory where someone truly never wants to have sex, I think it's really important to figure out why. Because God designs us for real intimacy and passion. He does. And we express that sexually, yes, but we're designed for intimacy and passion all the time, like in all areas of our lives. and then it's the pinnacle is the physical. But often when people are running away from the physical, they're also running away from intimacy and passion in other areas of their lives too. Like, this isn't good. It isn't good for anybody. And so we need to figure out, is the reason we're running away from this, is it because of something in our relationship? Is it because of something in them? But it isn't good for them, for you to just say, well, I guess that's just the way it is and I'll just live with this. No, like let's figure out what it is, because that's a help to them. And so it might mean going to see a licensed counselor. And if they don't want to see a counselor, you see a counselor on your own, so that you can talk through these issues, maybe get some clues as to what's going on, and at least figure out how to deal with it. But it isn't healthy to just never want sex for no reason. That you can see it to do with the marriage. And so let's figure out what's really going on. Because if it was that your spouse never wanted to get out of a chair, you'd say, well, that's not a healthy way to live life. And I want more for you than that. Right. So, let's get to the heart of the issue. So I think it's really important to distinguish between, is it just a preference or a problem? And if it's a problem, I don't think the answer is to say, how can I make myself live with this? I think the answer is to say, no, this is an issue. And so let's deal with it. Let's see the licensed counselor. Let's figure it out. Now, as for the other question.
Yeah, well, so the other one about what do you do when you're going through a period of abstinence, and how do you handle that? And, I can't speak to that specifically, but what I can tell from my experience is that when Sheila and I were first married, I had a very high libido and she had a lower libido. And I felt like it was the worst thing in the world that I had to curb my enthusiasm because I had bought into the mindset that is really prevalent out there, that sexual urges are unstoppable. They are insatiable. Like, there's nothing you can do about it, sort of mentality. And, urges are just that. They're urges. They're not all consuming if you don't let them be all consuming. And what we focus on, we tend to feed. So if we're constantly thinking about how we can't have physical sexual release, then we're going to be more and more and more frustrated. But if instead we try and turn that energy into other things, other pursuits, and use that energy and that drive for things that further God's kingdom, that build me up as a person, and try to just generally promote my health, then I think that will be a really good thing. The other thing I would say is having some community to meet those emotional and sort of spiritual connection things will also help as well too, because as we said, what we're looking for is not just physical, it's also emotional as well.
And I mean, some of the best art in the world was people sublimating their sexual desire into something else, like Michelangelo or whatever. So when you are just going through a period where there's a lot of sexual frustration, you can't do anything about it, that's when you just get busy. You volunteer, you find out what are you passionate about, and you throw yourself into that passion or that hobby, or giving to other people, whatever it might be, but you grow the sides of your life that bring you joy and passion. And you can, that's what they call sublimating. And it's not a bad thing. That's where we get our energy for lots of things. So you can take that desire that you have for sex and put it into passion for something else in your life. And I think that's how we turn it around into something that's positive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right, cool. You're specifically talking about masculinity, right? So I'm going to talk to the men here. Okay. I think we need to let our masculinity inform our theology rather than letting our, let our theology inform our masculinity rather than letting our masculinity inform our theology. What I mean by that is we have a lot of people out there who have an idea of what it means to be a man, and then they somehow try and make the Bible fit that, as opposed to looking at Jesus. And what I'm talking about specifically is this whole idea of sort of toxic masculinity. And Jesus was truly a man, but he was not toxic. Jesus was very much a man, but he was very much a person that women felt safe around, that women felt comfortable with, and women felt they could relate to. And I think that a lot of our culture celebrates the masculine as conquering, dominating, controlling. That is not what I see in Jesus. In Jesus, I see a man who said, if someone strikes you in the cheek, turn the other cheek. Jesus said, when people are talking about who should be in charge, the Gentiles rule over each other. Not so among you. Jesus was always a servant. Jesus was always caring. Jesus was gentle and humble in heart. To me, if your idea of what it means to be a man does not involve those kind of concepts, then your idea of masculinity is not one that jives with Christianity and with Jesus. But we see it time and time again. And pornography is a very good example of that, because the whole point of pornography is what I can take from this, as opposed to what I can give to my wife or what we can share together. Wow. So it becomes this idea of I'm more of a man because I did this better than you, or competitive, or that sort of thing, as opposed to being something that's meant to be mutual, intimate, something that builds the two of you up as a couple. I don't know if that makes sense or if that sort of answers your question, but that's sort of what where I would start.
Yeah, I think too.
Was that good, Keith?
Pardon me?
I'm sorry.
Wow, you're like the second guy who misnamed me Keith. Do I look like a Keith?
Yeah. Kind of.
Oh.
I think I would also add to that.
Sorry, we missed what you said.
I just want to add a little bit more to that. What we found in our surveys for guys is that porn use is highly correlated with both erectile dysfunction and delayed ejaculation. So the more porn you use, the more those things happen, because those things can often be because you need this major stimulation in order to maintain an erection or to ejaculate. And so when you don't get this major stimulation, then it just doesn't happen. And again, it's because we've distorted what sex is. If we can stop thinking of sex as like, I want this massive sexual experience and I want sex, and start thinking instead, I want my wife. Because those are very different things. It's not about having this massive sexual experience. It's about being completely intimate. And no one is judging you. Like no one's gonna pull up a 9.2 at the end of that and say, you could have done that a little better, right? Like this is about this is about how you feel. And so what makes sex really, really great is how you feel about each other. It's not necessarily whether the bed frame was moving or whether the bed broke or anything like that. But I think it just comes from that reframing of this is something that we're experiencing together. It's not that we're chasing an orgasm, it's that we're chasing each other. And as we chase each other, that's what makes it really beautiful.
Wow. Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that?
Oh, okay. I don't know what I was saying.
We're not chasing an experience, we're chasing each other.
Yes. Don't chase the orgasm, chase each other. Hello.
When our youngest daughter was 11, a Sunday school teacher told her that she was going to have to start watching what shirts she wore, because now that she was developing, she could be a stumbling block. And she didn't want to go to church for a couple of weeks after that, because she was all freaking out that adult men were going to be looking at her chest. Like, what have we become? What have we become when we in the church are saying that an 11 or 12-year-old girl is a stumbling block to an adult man, rather than saying that adult man is a threat to her?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, Jesus said, there's several different passages that are often used about the stumbling block, misused about the stumbling block. One is in, let's see, 1 Corinthians 8 and Romans 14. It's almost the same argument in both, I believe. And Paul is arguing, like, look, people, there's some people that are weak in the faith, okay, and they don't eat meat sacrificed to idols, and we do, because we understand there's nothing to it. But you don't want to weaken someone's faith and become a stumbling block, right? And he's not saying that you're causing someone to sin. He's saying you don't want to weaken their faith. And so that's why you want to be careful what you do. And so this has been used to tell girls not to be a stumbling block. But if we're telling a 14-year-old girl she needs to be careful what she wears so adult men don't lust after her, whose faith is being weakened there? The girl's, who is now freaked out by the pastors and the elders, who now feels like her body has betrayed her and her body is her enemy?
Right.
Or the men? Like, we are weakening the faith of girls. And in our survey, it's coming out next year in our mother-daughter book, but these modesty messages that have been given to girls are highly correlated with marrying abusive men, with being sexual abuse survivors yourself, with very low self. Like, it's terrible. It's a toxic mix of sludge and awful stuff. So we need to stop talking about it that way. And we need to just tell our girls, you know what? Let's just dress to show that you respect yourself, and whatever that means to you, and whatever you decide that should be as a family, and teach her that she's worthy of respect from everybody, including herself. And so you dress to show it's not about being a stumbling block. It's not about lust. It's not about any of that. It's just dressing to respect yourself. I think that's an important message. As for the guys, let me tell you a story. There was something that went really viral a couple of years ago. A mother posted this, and she was so proud of herself because she and her two teenage boys were sitting in a pew at church. And then this woman walked in with her teenage daughters who were in yoga pants, and they sat directly in front of these boys. And so the mom stood up with her teenage boys and moved them in front of in front of the girls, so the boys wouldn't be distracted by the girls all through the church service because of how immodestly these girls were dressed. And she was really proud of this, and she was spreading this on social media. But what has she now taught her boys? She has now taught her boys, if you see a girl like that, you can't help but objectify her. You will not be able to concentrate on God. Instead of just teaching the boys, you treat women with respect. Because even if every woman in church came to church in a paper bag or potato sack, the rest of the world is not going to do that. And so it can't be up to women in church to stop guys from lusting. Men have to be able to be with women and not lust, because the rest of the world is not going to dress the way we're telling women to dress in paper bags, potato sacks, so that they don't cause lust. We need to put the onus in the right place. And again, I think it really helps with boys to make the distinction between noticing and lusting.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And I talked about this in the talk too. Like, noticing isn't lusting. And if you notice a girl has a nice figure, you haven't sinned.
Yeah, we're so afraid of sexuality in the church, you know, that all forms of sexuality get lumped into the same category. So just normal, I'm a teenage boy, I think she's really pretty, I don't know what to do with this. All that is the same as lustful, predatory behavior. And they're not the same thing. And so, like, telling a boy, like, yeah, she's really pretty, you're going to be tempted to kind of consume her visually, but that's not what you should do, because it's not respectful to her. It's not respectful to you. It's not what God wants to do. Like, like you can control what you do with your thoughts. You're going to be attracted to women. That's normal. That's part of being an adolescent boy. But what you do with it, physically and mentally, that's what matters. And teaching men to have a healthy, respectful view of women is much more helpful than saying, make sure your eyes are never in a place where they might see a girl's backside. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Was that it?
Yes, that's it.
That's it. Thank you. Okay. Keith?
Yeah.
I can't wait to meet you, Keith.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff you're talking about. I mean, first it was Sheila, now it's you. It's like the two of you are a deadly combo. Deadly.
Depending on the day, I either joke that she learned everything from me or I learned everything from her in the crowd. I don't know you guys well enough which joke to make.
And I love your sense of humor. Makes me look like not funny. Dynamic. Sorry, not deadly. Dynamic. Somebody's telling me. Okay. We gotta let you go because we have no choice. It's not like I'm getting texts from people like saying let them go, and I'm like, I can't wait. I can't wait to meet you guys. Gigi, you can talk if you want. I can't wait to meet you guys, and I really mean that. Try to make it this year if you can. I mean, January is a long time away. Now that I met Keith, I'm like, oh, okay, can we do this sooner?
I have a question.
She has a question.
Can I email you the questions that were asked that were left unasked? Because I have about 12 questions that didn't get to be asked.
Yeah,
Sheila?
Yeah, if you can collect email addresses too, I can send out an email with all the answers as well.
Sure. Oh, here it is.
Okay, so if you gave me a question and I didn't ask it, text me, let me know if you want me to give her your email address and post the question. Okay?
Gigi, this is what just posted by the secretary. Yeah?
Okay,
So,
then.
Is it on Zoom?
So send an email to, from the Zoom chat, the secretary.
Yeah, Tammy did. Okay, yeah. So if you send an email to Sheila at SheilaWrayGregoire.com, and we will enter you for a draw we have our puberty course where you teach kids about sex and puberty. We have our orgasm course, our libido course, and then if you send me the 12 questions that are left over, I'll send out an email. I have like so many thousands of posts on my blog. I probably have a post about each of the questions, so I can just send you links to more stuff to read too, or videos. Yeah.
So Sheila, Keith, Tammy, thank you all so much. We'll keep in touch and we'll see you soon. It's been wonderful. They're all gonna stand up now and give you a standing. No, we're all gonna give her a standing ovation. So,